Hi, everyone. I am Brandy Oswald, a certified fertility awareness educator and the founder of Sauvage Wellness. Today's video pairs with my super popular blog post, The Essential Guide to Natural Birth Control, called Does Cycle Tracking as Birth Control Work, and Is It Right for You? So in today's video, we're going to talk all about that. How does cycle tracking as natural birth control actually work? And how can you know if it's the right method for you? We will deep dive into all of it. If you're reading this and if you're listening to this video, you're likely a woman in your 20s or 30s who is fed up with years, if not decades, of hormonal birth control use and searching for a natural way to prevent pregnancy without all the side effects and synthetic hormones. You've probably heard about people using cycle tracking as birth control, and you may even have a cycle tracking app right on your phone. And you're sitting there asking yourself, will this work for me? How do I know if I'm doing it right? Well, as a certified fertility awareness educator who has taught cycle tracking as birth control to women in over 6 countries across 3 continents, I can tell you that you're not alone. Every day, I hear from women who want to use cycle tracking as birth control, but aren't sure if it will work for them or even how to get started. And with an estimated 50 million women worldwide already using cycle tracking apps to track their cycles, it is abundantly clear that we want to better understand our menstrual cycles and be more in control of our fertility. Health classes and sexual education in the United States has failed to teach so many of us how our bodies truly work. It makes sense that you feel stuck on hormonal birth control because we've never been taught how to identify our fertile windows, when in each cycle we can even get pregnant, or how to know when ovulation happens. We've never been taught that we can prevent pregnancy all on our own because our cycles show us when we're fertile every month. The truth is that we can prevent pregnancy without hormonal birth control, diaphragms, and condoms. We don't have to settle for birth control methods that alter our natural hormones and leave us riddled with side effects. You do not have to settle. You deserve a birth control method that works with your body and doesn't mess with your hormones or cycle and comes with absolutely no side effects. If that sounds like something you've been wanting, then cycle tracking as birth control might just be what you're looking for. Let's demystify your menstrual cycle and explore how to know if cycle tracking as birth control is right for you. Throughout the rest of this video, I'm going to use terms that are really common when we're talking about cycle tracking as birth control. However, I'm not going to define them in the video. You'll want to head to the blog post, which is linked below, where I include a complete glossary of all the terms that I'll be using throughout this video. So make sure you take a moment to read those, especially if as you're listening, some of these terms don't quite make sense to you. So once you've got the language down and you've checked out the glossary, it's now time to explore how cycle tracking as birth control works and whether or not it's right for you. The first thing we want to talk about is what hormonal birth control does to your menstrual cycle. Before diving into cycle tracking as birth control, I want to talk a bit about hormonal birth control and what it does to your cycle, because one of the number one questions I get is, can I cycle track while I'm on hormonal birth control? And the answer is not really. And here's why. All forms of hormonal birth control that all alter our reproductive hormones, estrogen and or progesterone. In doing so, they alter the shifts in cervical fluid and basal body temperature that one would track with cycle tracking, because these vital signs are dependent on the hormones estrogen and progesterone. Most hormonal birth control methods also suppress ovulation, and without ovulation, there really isn't a menstrual cycle at all, just one long, ongoing, unchanging state. There isn't a cycle to track because without ovulation, there isn't any cycling that happens. If you want to track changes in cervical fluid and temperature, you need to ovulate, which likely means you need to be off of hormonal birth control. However, there are a few things that you can keep track of while on hormonal birth control that are helpful to know about. And these things can include the start and end date of any bleed that occurs. Note, a bleed that occurs on any form of hormonal birth control besides the hormonal IUD is not a real period. It is a chemical bleed, and this is because you only get a true period if ovulation occurs. If you want more info on that, you want to head to the blog post that's linked below. I linked to another post where I talk all about why periods on hormonal birth control are not real periods. Another thing you can keep track of while on hormonal birth control is the color and quantity of whatever bleed you get. The symptoms that arise, both those that coincide with the bleed and those that do not, and when you have intercourse, just to see when that's happening as you move throughout your life. Keeping track of these things while on hormonal birth control can help you better understand what is your normal birth control bleed, when and if you notice a rise or a shift in your libido, and to identify any side effects or symptoms that could need attention. Now that we've cleared that up, the impact that hormonal birth control can have on our cycle and whether or not we can cycle track while on those methods, we can dive into cycle tracking methods of birth control. So cycle tracking methods of birth control are called fertility awareness methods, FAMs, or natural family planning methods, NFPs. It's important to note that cycle tracking on its own is not a form of birth control. I'm going to say that again. Cycle tracking on its own is not a form of birth control. It is simply keeping track of one's cycle signs and symptoms. In order to use cycle tracking as birth control, we must learn the rules of a specific fertility awareness method. Cycle tracking without those FAM rules is just a detailed look at one's menstrual cycle. Yes, even if you use an app. And we'll get to that later on in this video. Fertility awareness methods prevent pregnancy by identifying the fertile window in each menstrual cycle so that users can either avoid intercourse or use a barrier method during the days on which intercourse can lead to pregnancy. Despite what health class and sex ed led us to believe, we can't actually get pregnant anytime we have sex. We can only get pregnant on about 6 days per cycle, the 5 days leading up to ovulation and the 24 hours that follow. This is because sperm can live in a menstruating person's body for up to 5 days in optimal cervical fluid. And the egg, once released during ovulation, is viable for conception for 12 to 24 hours. This creates a 6-day fertile window. Outside of this window, it is biologically, scientifically impossible to get pregnant. And if you do not believe me, head to the link below to that blog post. I link to studies, scientific research studies, where you can see the proof of the words I just spoke. Now, there are different types of fertility awareness methods. The most common are cervical fluid only method. This is a fertility awareness method that uses only cervical fluid tracking and rules to prevent pregnancy. Very popular cervical fluid only method is the Billings ovulation method. Another common method is the temperature only method. This FAM uses only basal body temperature and coinciding rules to prevent pregnancy. The symptothermal method. This FAM uses both cervical fluid and basal body temperature tracking and rules to prevent pregnancy. This is a method that is featured in the very popular book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Wexler. The symptohormonal method. This FAM uses urinary hormone testing, cervical fluid, and or basal body temp tracking and rules. And a popular symptohormonal method is the Marquette method. And lastly, we have the symptothermal double check method. This fertility awareness method uses both cervical fluid and basal body temperature and rules to prevent pregnancy, plus cycle length data for added efficacy when opening the fertile window. Two popular symptothermal double check methods are NFPTA and SensiPlan. I am trained in NFPTA. Each method has its own efficacy rating. In my practice, I use personally and teach professionally the symptothermal double check method because it has the highest efficacy rating of any fertility awareness method that I've seen at the time of creating this video. The symptothermal double check method is studied to be up to 99.6% effective when learned from a trained educator and all rules are followed. That's the same as the birth control pill, everybody. And if you want a link to the research study, I have it in the blog post below. You can read the actual study, the Petra Frank Herman study, that is the one from which we derived that 99.6% perfect use efficacy rate. Now, a quick word on efficacy ratings of fertility awareness methods and NFPs. Websites like Planned Parenthood will list FAMs and NFPs as being only roughly 70% effective, which is incredibly misleading. This low efficacy rating comes from grouping all cycle tracking methods together to create a group rating. This is misleading because it almost always includes the rhythm method, which is an outdated and ineffective method of birth control that is based on past cycle data as opposed to real-time cycle signs like true fertility awareness methods. Using past cycle data to determine one's current fertile window is inaccurate because we are not robots, and simple everyday things like getting sick, starting a new medication, and stress can all hinder ovulation. And in fact, the rhythm method isn't a fertility awareness method at all. Including this ineffective method in efficacy ratings drags down the efficacy rating of other much more effective methods. Now that we've got that cleared up, let's talk about how cervical fluid tracking can help us prevent pregnancy. In my professional opinion, cervical fluid is the most important cycle tracking sign. This is because cervical fluid tells us when we are going to ovulate before it happens. It signals to us that the body is preparing to ovulate and when we need to open our fertile window. Leading up to ovulation, we experience a rise in estrogen that triggers the cervix to make noticeably wetter and slipperier cervical fluid. These types of wet, fertile cervical fluid help us know that the body is getting ready to ovulate, and intercourse could lead to pregnancy, so we must abstain or use a barrier method. Following ovulation, as estrogen declines and progesterone soars, cervical fluid dries up and becomes noticeably stickier. This tells us that we have likely ovulated and our fertile window is closing. To track cervical fluid, we simply notice what's on toilet paper and our underwear as we go to the bathroom, as well as how it feels when we're walking around as we move throughout our days. It takes maybe 3 minutes a day to do this. And by simply doing daily cervical fluid tracking, we have access to so much important information that can help us naturally prevent pregnancy. From there, we want to talk about how basal body temperature also helps us prevent pregnancy. Basal body temperature tracking is used only to close the fertile window. We never use temperature tracking to open the fertile window. That's why I consider cervical fluid tracking so important. The reason we can only use temperature to close the fertile window is because it is impacted by progesterone, which is made only after ovulation. As a result of ovulation, progesterone surges and causes a subtle rise in basal body temperature, usually by several tenths of a degree, which is detectable with daily tracking using a basal body or fertility thermometer. Once we notice this rise in temperature, we know that ovulation has occurred and our fertile window is rapidly coming to a close. If there's one thing that I would tattoo on my forehead, it's that we do not want to rely on temperature tracking to open a fertile window. If you're only tracking temperature and you open your fertile window before ovulation, you do not have an effective birth control method. That brings me to cycle tracking apps. There's one question that always comes up when I talk about ditching hormonal birth control for fertility awareness methods, and that's, can't I just use a cycle tracking app? And no, the answer is no. The truth is that these new wildly popular cycle tracking and fertility apps and devices are probably not what we're looking for, and they might in fact be doing more harm than good when it comes to birth control. There are a great deal of cycle tracking apps available on our smartphones and cycle tracking devices like Natural Cycles, Daisy, the Oura Ring, and even the Apple Watch that claim to be natural forms of birth control. These claims, however, may not be as accurate as we've been led to believe. And in fact, some of these devices and companies have even started shifting their language away from making any even side claims, right, about tangential claims that their devices could be used as birth control, because they've been getting into a little bit of hot water with clients using them that way. A large number of my clients have come to me to learn how to use fertility awareness methods as natural birth control after experiencing an unplanned pregnancy while using a cycle tracking app or a fertility device like Natural Cycles. So why is this happening? It's because cycle tracking apps do not open our fertile windows accurately. This means that they can either open the fertile window too early, which can impact our efforts when folks are trying to conceive, or too late, which leaves us pregnant when we don't want to be. As we've talked about, the best way to open one's fertile window is by using daily cervical fluid tracking. And while many of these cycle tracking apps and fertility trackers allow us to enter cervical fluid data, they do not, in fact, often use that information when determining the opening of one's fertile window. Instead, these apps and devices use temperature tracking, past cycle data, and algorithms to open the fertile window. This doesn't always work because, as you know, temperature tracking tells us nothing about when to open the fertile window, only when to close it. And therefore, if we've been waiting for a change in temperature to open our fertile window, then we've waited too long and have been having unprotected intercourse during highly fertile days, which is a serious yikes. And past cycle data doesn't work as a marker for opening one's fertile window either, because women are not robots and we don't ovulate at the same time in every cycle. As I've mentioned, simple everyday things like illness, travel, stress can all alter when we ovulate in any given cycle. That means if we assume we're going to ovulate and have the same fertile window month to month, we will certainly run into trouble. And lastly, algorithms are not the best way to open one's fertile window because we are not computers. We're not statistics. We're not research cohorts. We are real living humans with variations in cycles, health, lifestyle, and more. So while algorithms may be true for many women, they're not true for all women. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to my birth control method, I want the information to be based on me and my body, not a large cohort of other women who were studied to create algorithms, right? I want my birth control method to be based on me. When it comes to cycle tracking as natural birth control, cycle tracking apps are often not enough. They don't use all the vital information needed to accurately open and close the fertile window. What we really need in order to use cycle tracking as birth control is daily cervical fluid tracking, daily temperature tracking, and the rules of a fertility awareness method that tells us how to use this information to effectively open and close our fertile windows. So now we've come to the part you've been waiting for, how to know if fertility awareness methods of birth control are right for you. So now that you've got the inside scoop on how these methods work as natural birth control, it's time to decide if they're going to be the right choice for you. When women come to me to learn how to use fertility awareness methods as birth control, I always recommend that they ask themselves the following questions. First, are you willing to spend 5 minutes a day tracking your cycle as opposed to a set it and forget it method like the IUD or just popping a pill? Do you feel comfortable talking to your sexual partners about your menstrual cycle and your fertile window? Are you comfortable telling, not asking, your sexual partners to use a barrier method during your fertile window or to abstain, whichever you choose, whichever feels more comfortable to you? And it is important that you tell them, not ask them, if you're using this method as birth control. Do you want to better understand your menstrual cycle and rid your body of synthetic birth control hormones? And are you ready to be 100% in control of your menstrual cycle and your fertility? If you can answer yes to all of these questions, then fertility awareness methods as birth control could be a great fit for you. And if you want to take some time to really sit with these questions and journal them or think about them or meditate on them, head to the blog post that's linked below. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll find all these questions typed right out. You could write them down in your journal, you could print them out and spend some time with them. So once you've decided whether or not using a fertility awareness method as birth control is right for you, it might be time for you to get started. So let's talk about 5 steps for how to use cycle tracking as birth control. Step number 1, you want to find a trained and qualified fertility awareness educator. Just like you wouldn't insert an IUD on your own or pop a prescription pill without talking to your doctor first, you shouldn't rely on a fertility awareness method without getting help from a trained professional. Most people don't know this, but doctors, nurses, and even gynecologists are not trained to teach you how to use fertility awareness methods as birth control. The professionals that are trained to teach fertility awareness methods are called fertility awareness educators, like myself. We have participated in and graduated from fertility awareness teacher training programs, many of which involve over a year of study, practice clients, case studies, and several rounds of final exams. It's important to note that the efficacy rating of fertility awareness methods are based on learning these methods from trained educators. Step number 2 is to learn how to track cervical fluid, basal body temperature, and use the specific rules of the fertility awareness method of your choosing. With the help of your FAM educator, it is important to learn how to accurately track cervical fluid, temperature, and the rules of your chosen method. It's especially important to learn how to track these cycle signs in a variety of cycle scenarios, like when ovulation is delayed, when we're sick, if we have abnormal bleeding, and more. There's a lot of different cycle scenarios that we need to know how to keep track of, as they might arise at some point in time in our cycle. That's where your FAM educator will be able to walk you step by step through your personal cycle and practice cycles so that you're equipped to handle a lot of different cycle variations that could arise as you use this method over years and years. Step number 3 is to do a lot of practice charts. Doing practice charts is hugely important before relying on FAMs as birth control. I don't know about you, but I would not want my first go at applying fertility awareness rules to be on my own cycle when the stakes are crazy high. That's where practice charts come in. Practice using the rules on sample cycles. Make mistakes on charts that don't matter. Hone your skill set with the method before using it on your own cycle. And that's where your fertility awareness educator will come in as well. They can provide you with a lot of practice charts and a lot of practice opportunities. Step number 4 is to be patient. Learning how to use FAMs as birth control takes patience, especially in the beginning. I always recommend that new FAM users commit to using a barrier method like condoms for the first 3 full menstrual cycles that they have while charting. This allows them to get used to accurately tracking their cycle and their cycle signs, as well as applying the rules of the method to their menstrual cycle before fully relying on it. I have found that this helps improve both efficacy and confidence of new FAM users. And lastly, step number 5 is to decide when to go off of hormonal birth control. This is perhaps the number 1 question I get when folks are considering working with me. Should I go off of my birth control before, during, or after taking your course? And the truth is that there's no right answer. There are pros and cons to each, so we'll take a look at each. If you choose to ditch your hormonal birth control before working with a FAM educator, you will have the most hands-on practice with applying the method to your personal menstrual cycle. You will also be supporting a quicker return of ovulation and your menstrual cycle if your cycle has been suppressed by a birth control method like the pill, ring, or implant. This can be hugely beneficial in building your experience and confidence with using the method. Now, if you choose to go off hormonal birth control while working with your FAM educator, you will get some benefits of being off of hormonal birth control methods and being able to practice tracking your own cycle, as well as having the support of your FAM educator as you come off of your hormonal birth control. And for some folks, that's a big perk. They will take the sacrifice of not getting as much time practicing the method on their personal cycle so that they can have the support of their FAM educator as they make the transition off their birth control. And if you choose to quit hormonal birth control after working with a FAM educator, you will have the opportunity to fully know and understand your chosen fertility awareness method before taking away the safety net of your hormonal method. However, you will have no practice actually tracking your personal menstrual cycle and applying the rules of your FAM to your actual cycle, which can be a major downside of waiting. I often recommend that folks plan to ditch their hormonal method either before or during their time working with a FAM educator. In fact, even those who set out to stay on their hormonal birth control while learning how to use FAMs when working with me almost always ditch their hormonal method while we're working together because they get so excited to start using the fertility awareness method rules and tracking and working with their own cycle. So now that we're coming to the end of today's video, I want to give you a few key takeaways. So if nothing else sticks with you from this video, which has been a bit long, I get it, here are the key things to take away. Number one, cycle tracking on its own is not a birth control method. In order to use cycle tracking as birth control, you must learn the rules of a specific fertility awareness method. Number two, you cannot cycle track while on hormonal birth control because most hormonal birth control methods suppress ovulation and the menstrual cycle. And all hormonal methods alter important cycle signs like cervical fluid and basal body temperature that we need to be tracking when we're using fertility awareness methods. Number three, cycle tracking apps and devices are also not effective forms of birth control. They are largely prediction-based methods that utilize past cycle data and algorithms to predict one's fertile window, instead of using more accurate real-time data like cervical fluid and basal body temperature to identify the current fertile window rather than predict it. Number four, before switching to fertility awareness methods as birth control, take a moment to ask yourself a few key questions about your comfort and willingness to have open conversations with your doctors and sexual partners around your menstrual cycle, fertile window, and barrier method use. Number five, be sure to work with a trained and qualified fertility awareness educator when learning how to use fertility awareness methods as birth control. This will help ensure greater efficacy and accuracy when using the methods. And lastly, number six, it is important to do lots of practice charts and to have patience with your own menstrual cycle as you learn how to use fertility awareness methods as birth control. This too helps ensure greater efficacy and accuracy while building your confidence in using the method and your tracking skills. So now that you've gotten all this content, you've identified the key takeaways, the question is, do you want to learn about using fertility awareness methods and cycle tracking as your natural birth control method? If so, I have two options for you. I have an amazing free 5-day cycle tracking mini course. In this mini course, I will walk you step by step, one email per day for 5 days and show you exactly how hormonal birth control changes your brain and the surprising ways the pill, patch, shot, ring, and IUDs impact our bodies. I will deep dive even further into why cycle tracking apps, rings in the Apple Watch, and even devices like Natural Cycles are not effective birth control options. We'll talk about how to get started cycle tracking the right way using cervical fluid and basal body temperature, and how to use cycle tracking as natural birth control and, wait for it, to have better periods. So if you want to go even deeper with this content, definitely head below to the blog post and the links I've included to join my free 5-day cycle tracking mini course. Or if you're ready to really check out what it's like to work with me, you want to head to my Cycle Wisdom course. I'll include the link below for you. That is where I do all of my client work. It's where you learn exactly how to use this method with your cycle. It's where you get all your practice charts. It's where you get to work with me as your fertility awareness educator. Check that out. Thank you so much for joining me today for this incredible deep dive video into how cycle tracking as birth control actually works and to figure out if it's the right method for you. Again, I am Brandy Oswald, the founder of Sauvage Wellness, and I cannot wait to join you back here again next time for another incredible conversation around fertility awareness methods, menstrual cycles, and natural birth control. Thank you so much for joining me.